My name is Reid Gallagher, and I was 57 the year. My daughter sent a text that took 9 words to undo 23 years. We're keeping Thanksgiving small this year, just us. No explanation, no comma out of place. 2 weeks before the long weekend, while I was in my workshop with sawdust on my hands, pulling a broken spoke from an old reading chair I'd been meaning to fix since spring. Before I take you into that October, please take a moment to like and subscribe, and tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is there. I'd genuinely like to know who's sitting with me right now, because somewhere over the Maritimes, 2 days later, my phone came back to life at cruising altitude and told me I had 11 missed calls, all from the same daughter who just told me not to come. Let me take you back to that gray afternoon. I was in the workshop when it buzzed, the kind of flat October light that settles low over Perry Sound and can't decide whether to be warm or cold. Cedar dust on my hands, spread on the workbench in front of me, under a coffee mug, were the plans for a canoe I'd been drawing since July. Hand-sketched. Mine, 14 feet of cedar strip I'd promised to build with my grandson Luke's when he'd pressed his small palms flat on the paper and said, "Grandpa, when do we start?" I wiped my hands on my jeans and picked up the phone. My daughter's name on the screen. Even then, even after everything that had passed, something lifted in my chest just seeing it. We're keeping Thanksgiving small this year, just us. I read it once, then again, then a third time. The way you reread something when the words don't fit the sentence the way they should. I set the phone on the bench. Typed back, "What happened?" 3 dots appeared on the screen. I watched them pulse, then they stopped. No message came. I didn't call. I've never pushed where I haven't been invited. But standing there in that cold workshop with cedar shavings curled on the floor around my boots, I started counting what all that restraint had actually cost me. I'd been keeping a very long tab. You should know who I was to that family before any of this, not to make myself the hero. I had plenty of flaws. But because what happened needs that ground under it. I was 41 when my wife Nora died. Brain aneurysm. Tuesday she had a headache. Friday she was gone. My daughter Fiona was 14. My son Blake was 9. I had a small electrical contracting business out of the back of a work van, and I kept it running because there was no other choice. After the funeral, I took on a second contract doing industrial work nights so we could keep the house. I had a rule. I didn't miss things. Fiona's volleyball games, her grad, every recital, and parent-teacher night. I showed up in my work clothes because I came straight from a job site, and I sat at the back so I wouldn't embarrass her, and I clapped longer than anyone. There was a year the GST audit nearly broke the business. Fiona wanted to do a summer music program at Lakefield. $1,400. I sold Nora's mother's pearl earrings, the ones she'd kept in a velvet pouch in the sock drawer, to cover it. I never told her. Guilt is a heavy thing for a teenager who's already carrying more than her share. I wasn't a perfect father. I was quiet. I worked too much. I let the house go quieter than it should have after Nora went, and I let dinners pass without saying the things that probably needed saying while there was still easy time to say them. But I showed up, every time. That was the one thing I knew how to do. So you understand what that text cost me. It wasn't just a long weekend dinner. It was 23 years of showing up, reduced to a message I could read in 3 seconds flat. I can tell you when it started. It started with Spencer. My daughter brought him home 4 years ago. Good-looking in the particular way of men who've made a project of it. He was an executive coach, helped corporate clients, in his words, optimize their leadership presence. His clothes fit exactly right. His handshake had 2 pumps, firm and measured, like he'd read somewhere that's the correct number. He looked around my workshop that first visit the way you look at something behind glass, admiring without intending to touch. "This is incredible," he said, running a finger along a cabinet I'd built. "You actually made this? With your hands?" In 4 years of Sunday dinners and family photos, he never once called me Dad, always Reid, even when Fiona used Dad in the same sentence. That first Thanksgiving after they married, I offered to host the way I always had. Turkey, my mother's stuffing recipe I'd been making since Nora couldn't anymore. Spencer smiled and put his hand on my daughter's shoulder. "We're thinking we'll host this year, Reid. Keep the gathering tight." Tight. I had 2 children, I was half the gathering. I laughed it off. I ate at their place that year, at the far end of the table, and watched him watch the room like a director surveying a set. After that, the door just slowly stopped being left open. Nobody slams a door, they just stop holding it. The second year, I got the address by text the afternoon of dinner. The third year, Lucas's 7th birthday came and went, and I found out from a photo Fiona posted 7 candles, a superhero cake, all of Spencer's family and none of mine. When I asked, she said it had been small, just Spencer's side this year. Spencer's side, as if I were the opposing team. The calls thinned. Sundays became every other Sunday, then holidays only when she needed something specific. Each time I told myself the same thing. Don't make waves. Don't be difficult. A father who pushes becomes a burden. I would not be a burden. Every inch I gave, he took, and he was patient about it. But there was one thing they hadn't managed to remove. Lucas. 10 years old, all elbows and focus, with that particular concentration kids have when they've found the one thing that lights them up. His thing was making things. He'd sit with me in the workshop for hours, handing me clamps, watching me cut, asking why the grain ran one way and not another. He smelled like cedar for days after a visit. Last spring, I'd unrolled the canoe plans on the bench and shown him what we were going to build. Cedar strip, 14 feet, big enough for 2 on the river. You promise, Grandpa? I promise. He'd tucked a scrap of off-cut cedar into his jacket pocket to take home, kept it on his windowsill. After the October text, the visit started getting canceled. Hockey, a cold, a full schedule. I drove to town twice with tools in the truck and got turned around before I knocked. I could see what was happening. I just kept slow walking toward believing it. Then Lucas called me himself. He'd found his mother's old tablet, taken it to his room, figured out how to reach me on video. His face filled the screen too close, the way kids hold cameras before they understand perspective. Grandpa, are you coming for Thanksgiving? I chose my words carefully. You don't put grown-up poison in a child's cup. Not this year, bud. I'm going to fly out to see Uncle Blake in St. John's. His face fell, but we didn't finish the canoe. I know. You pinky promised. And I keep those. I held my voice steady. The canoe's still happening, I swear it. He glanced back at his closed door, then leaned toward the screen and lowered his voice. Grandpa, why doesn't Dad want you here? My chest pulled tight. What makes you ask that? I heard them in the kitchen. Dad said a word I'm not allowed to say, and Mom was crying, and he said, Lucas glanced back again. He said, you always make things about yourself. You always make things about yourself. I could have driven a fist through a wall. I breathed through my nose and kept my voice like still water. None of that is your job to figure out, bud. That's grown-up stuff, not yours. Are you mad at me? Not possible, not once in my whole life. He almost smiled. Then I heard a door somewhere behind him. Lucas, who are you talking to? Spencer. The boy's eyes went wide. I gotta go, Grandpa. Screen went black. I sat for a long time with the dark glass in my hand, imagining what was happening in that room. A 10-year-old carrying other people's conflict in his chest. And I made a decision right then that had nothing to do with a seat at a table. Before I take you into what happened next, I want to stop for just a second. If something in this story has landed somewhere familiar for you, do me one small favor and hit that subscribe button. Stories like this one don't need to stay invisible. And tell me in the comments, have you ever had to choose your own dignity over a seat at someone else's table? I read every single reply. Now the letter. 3 days after the text, a cream-colored envelope came in the mail. Thick paper, my name written by an actual hand. The return address was the Perry Sound Legion, Unit 117. I opened it standing at the mailbox. Inside was a letter from a woman named Dorothy Kearns, who chaired the town's community service board. She wrote plainly and didn't waste words. The Legion's annual Community Builder Recognition Dinner was in 2 weeks, and the board had voted to give me their Distinguished Service Award for quietly paying the first-year apprenticeship costs for young tradespeople in the area who couldn't cover tools, union fees, and the first year of training on their own. 31 people, she had counted, who now held Red Seal certificates because of a fund I'd never named and almost never spoken about. I read it twice, folded it back into the envelope, put it in the kitchen drawer, the one with the spare batteries and the takeout menus, and closed it. I didn't call my daughter to tell her. Why would I? She'd made clear there was no room for me. There was certainly no room for this. But standing at that counter with my hands still on the drawer, something shifted. For years, I'd measured myself by whether my children still needed me. That letter reminded me there was a whole town that had never stopped seeing me. That night I called Blake. He teaches at the Marine Institute in St. John's. He crossed a country of his own and ended up working with his hands the way I always had. He picked up on the second ring. "Dad, everything okay?" I told him about the text, kept my voice level. "It's both a habit and a flaw." A moment of quiet, then "Dad, come out here for Thanksgiving. Let them keep their table. Come here. You've got your own life, Blake." "You are my life, you stubborn man. Book the flight." So I did. Right there at the kitchen table with Blake on speaker walking me through it. A red-eye from Toronto Pearson the night before the long weekend, into St. John's by morning. For the first time in years, I chose myself, not out of spite, out of something quieter and older than spite. I was tired of standing at doors that didn't open, when there was a son on the other side of the country who'd leave his open all night. Blake said he'd have the coffee on. I felt lighter than I had in months. What I hadn't accounted for was what the letter in the drawer was about to set loose. I tried once more before I left. I want that on the record. Not to beg for the table. I was done with that, but I thought if we could just talk without him narrating, something might come loose. I called my daughter on a Tuesday afternoon. "Can we have coffee?" "Just us. 40 minutes. I'll come into the city." A pause. Movement in the background, then the phone changing hands, smooth as anything. "Reid, it's Spencer. Warm, reasonable, perfectly calibrated. Fiona's right here. She's just in the middle of something." I called my daughter. "She's building something real here, Reid. Maybe give her the room to do it." Room, again that word. She's my daughter. And she's my wife. We're on the same team. A pause. "Let's not make the long weekend harder than it needs to be. For everyone's sake." For everyone's sake. He used the family like a thing he'd borrowed from me and wasn't planning to return. Somewhere behind him, I could hear Fiona not taking the phone back. That silence told me more than any argument could have. "All right, Spencer," I said. "You take care," and I hung up before he could be gracious about it. I stood in the quiet kitchen and looked at my flight itinerary on the counter. Room, fine. I'd give them room. I'd give them the width of the whole country. Dorothy called the evening before my flight. "You're coming to the dinner tonight, Reid Gallagher. I have run out of patience for your modesty." The community dinner was that same Thursday evening, and my flight left the following day. I looked at the good blazer hanging on the door. Hadn't worn it since Blake's convocation 3 years ago. "Who's going to be there?" I asked. "The whole town, half the county. People whose names you changed without knowing it was you doing it." I almost said no. Every reason I had was true. All of them were small. Then I thought about Lucas, about you always make things about yourself. About a boy keeping a piece of cedar on his windowsill, waiting for a grandfather who kept getting turned around in the driveway. I thought about what you teach a child when you let a good man go quietly. "I'll come," I said. "I'll be there." The Legion Hall was full when I walked in. Long rows of folding chairs, string lights along the rafters, the smell of coffee, and whatever the volunteers had baked. 200 people, maybe more. I knew half of them. Dorothy met me at the door and steered me to a seat near the front. She'd correctly identified that I might bolt. I nearly did. She went to the podium, started talking about me. I sat there wishing I were somewhere building something with my hands. Then a man in the third row stood up. I didn't recognize his face, and said his daughter got her red seal because of the fund. A woman near the back said her nephew runs his own plumbing shop in Barrie now. Then another stood, then another. One by one, people I'd helped without keeping count. I sat with my hands folded and my ears burning. I build things because I don't like standing in rooms like this. But I looked at those faces and I understood something I hadn't known until that moment. Not one of them had ever treated my presence as optional. Dorothy called me to the front. The room stood, every chair. That's when I saw a face I recognized near the coffee table at the side of the hall. A man in a good coat watching me with open surprise. I'd seen him once in a framed photo on Spencer's office desk. His largest client, Terrence Booth, CEO of Booth Mercer Construction, one of the bigger residential builders in Ontario. He'd driven up for a local project and come to the dinner with a subcontractor he knew. He found me by the coffee afterward. "Reid Gallagher." He put out his hand. "Terrence Booth." That was genuinely something up there. We talked. Easy, the way two people talk when they both know what it means to be in the actual work. He asked how I came to Perry Sound, and I mentioned my daughter, her husband, Spencer Hadfield. His expression didn't change dramatically, just a small resort, the look of a man fitting two pieces together that he hadn't known were part of the same picture. Spencer's been coaching me for 2 years, he said slowly. He's never mentioned you. Not once. A pause. If my wife's father was the man this whole room just stood up for, I'd have led with it. Every single conversation, he looked at me steadily. That's strange. That's actually quite strange. He squeezed my hand once more. Real honor to meet you, Reid. And he drifted back into the crowd. I stood there with a paper cup of Tim's decaf, turning it in my hands. For 4 years, Spencer had worked to keep me out of the frame. He'd managed me carefully, patiently, right out of the picture. It had never once occurred to him that the two worlds, the small one he'd built without me, and the larger one he was climbing, might ever brush up against each other. They'd just met, in a Legion Hall, over bad coffee, with 200 people watching. I hadn't arranged it. I couldn't have. But I felt the ground move, just slightly, under a man who wasn't even in the room. The next morning, I sat at the kitchen table for a long time before leaving for the airport. I could have been cold. I'd earned cold. I could have sent my daughter a message about the gala, about Terrence, about 31 people who stood up for a man her husband had decided wasn't worth keeping in the frame. I could have made her feel the weight of all of it. I wrote the plainest thing I knew how to write instead. Fiona, I love you. I'm not going to keep asking for a place where I'm not wanted. I'm going out to Blake's for the long weekend. Give Lucas a hug for me and tell him the canoe is still on. Happy Thanksgiving, sweetheart. Dad. Read it once, sent it, turned the phone to silent, and picked up my bag. The workshop was quiet behind me when I locked up. The canoe plans were still spread on the bench under the mug. I'd be back for them. I drove to Toronto in the dark, checked my bag, found my gate. And then I did something I almost never do. I turned the phone completely off, not silent, off, black screen. I wanted the quiet, a few hours where no one could reach me. Somewhere over the Maritimes, I paid $12 for the airline satellite signal, force of habit, to check the weather in St. John's. The phone found a bar, then it started. Buzz, buzz, buzz. I watched the number stack. 11 missed calls, all my daughter, all within the past 2 hours. And under them, one message. Dad, please call me when you land. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I sat very still in the narrow seat, the ocean dark and enormous somewhere below. The man beside me had fallen asleep. A toddler 2 rows up was murmuring quietly at the window. I stared at those 11 calls for a long time. I won't pretend I felt nothing. Some small exhausted part of me felt the shift, the particular weight of a man who'd been cropped out of family photos, finally sitting unreachable at 30,000 feet, while the people who'd done the cropping tried to reach him 11 times. That part was there. I'm not made of stone, but it passed. Because underneath the number, she was still my daughter. The girl I'd carried on my shoulders at the Canada Day fireworks when she was 7, and she was somewhere down there hurting. That mattered more than being right. The moment I landed in St. John's, before I'd even cleared the jet bridge, I called her back. She answered before the first ring finished. Dad. Her voice broke on the word. I'm here, I said. Talk to me. It all came out. Someone from the Legion had posted photos to the community Facebook page overnight. Dorothy's speech, the people standing. My name on the screen behind me, large enough to read from the back row, and underneath it, the comments. 31 families she'd never known were connected to me, all of them telling her things about her own father she had never thought to ask. She'd scrolled and scrolled, the whole town telling her who I was in a voice she'd never heard. Why didn't you ever tell me? She said, crying now. 23 years, Dad. Why didn't you say? Because it wasn't yours to be impressed by. I didn't do any of it for that. Quiet from her end, ashamed quiet, the kind you have to let sit. Spencer wrote the text, she finally said. The one about Thanksgiving, he typed it himself. I let him. I've been letting him do a lot of things for a long time. She stopped. I looked at Lucas last night and I thought, I'm teaching him that this is what family looks like. I'm teaching him this is normal. I let her sit in it, not to punish her, because some things you have to feel all the way through or they just come back. Fiona, I finally said, I don't need an apology for the table. I need to know you'll think for yourself from here on out. That's the only thing I'm asking. I will, she said. I already asked him to leave. Last night, after I saw the photos and it all just became clear at once. He kept telling me it was for the family, for us, and I finally heard how it actually sounded. He was never protecting the family. He was managing it, managing me, managing you right out of the picture. I hadn't expected that, I'll be honest. I stood a little straighter in that terminal. People like that call control by nicer names, I said. I'm so sorry, Dad, for all of it. I know you are, and I did. I could hear it, real, raw, the way you hear truth when someone stopped performing it and is just saying it. The seat was never the point, sweetheart. You were. You always were. She cried harder at that, but it was a different kind of crying, the kind that lets something out instead of holding it in. And for the first time in 4 years, on a call across the country, my daughter sounded like herself again. Like the person she'd been before someone convinced her to be ashamed of where she came from. There's someone who wants to talk to you. I heard the phone change hands, small hands, quick breathing. Grandpa. Hey, bud. Are you really in Newfoundland right now? Just landed. There's fog everywhere. You'd think it was haunted. He laughed. That wide open laugh that has no performance in it. The kind children have before anyone teaches them to manage how they sound, and something that had been clenched in my chest for 4 years quietly let go. Then his voice dropped serious, the way it did when something genuinely mattered. Grandpa, the canoe, are we still doing it? You and me, I said, cedar strip. Plans are right on the bench waiting. I never moved them. You didn't? Not once. I still have the piece of cedar, he said, from your scrap pile. I never threw it out. I know you didn't, bud. A pause, then quieter. Mom cried a lot today, but she said it was the good kind. Yeah, my own eyes stinging. That's how you know things are starting to get fixed. Blake was waiting past the arrivals door. He didn't say anything clever. He pulled me into a hug right there in the terminal and held on. You came, he said into my shoulder. You told me to. First time you ever listened. We drove through the fog, the Atlantic sitting gray and close somewhere to the right. He talked the whole way. His students, his work, a woman named Colleen he wanted me to meet. That evening, he made Thanksgiving dinner. No turkey to be found anywhere nearby, so we had roast chicken and salt cod chowder and a pie his neighbor had left on the doorstep. We ate at a small table by the window with the fog on the harbor, and propped up on a tea tin, a tablet with Fiona and Lucas waving in from home. 2 tables, 1 family, half a country between them. More warmth in that small kitchen than I'd felt at a holiday in years. Blake raised his glass, to Dad, who finally figured out he was allowed to just be wanted. I couldn't speak. I lifted mine and nodded. Later, doing dishes, he bumped my shoulder with his. You know what your trouble was, Dad? I'm sure you'll tell me. You kept asking permission to be loved. You can't ask for that. It's either there or it isn't. I laughed, because if I didn't, I'd have wept into the dishwater. And Blake has enough to feel smug about already. It's been some months now, I can tell you how things settled. Spencer is gone, not destroyed, not run out, just no longer able to stand inside a family that finally saw clearly what he'd been doing. Last I heard, he'd taken on new clients in Calgary. Fresh territory, new people who don't know the story yet. I wish him no particular harm. I just don't need him near any table of mine. His business took a quiet turn in the new year. Terrence Booth sent a short, professional email about a change in direction. Word travels in those circles. The same circles Spencer had spent his entire career climbing. An image consultant who quietly erased his father-in-law for not being polished enough. It was a bad look, and appearances were the only currency Spencer truly understood. 2 more clients drifted away, nothing dramatic, just the slow leak of a reputation, once people got a clearer look at the man doing the managing. I played no part in it, I made no calls. I said nothing against him to anyone. All I did was let myself be seen in a room full of people who wanted to see me. Spencer had spent years controlling what people looked at. The one moment the frame widened without his hand on it, everything he'd kept out of sight came into the light. He built that himself, every bit of it. My daughter started seeing a counselor that winter. She told me about it on our Sunday calls, which we started keeping again. Proper ones, not the obligatory kind. She's working through how it happened, year by year, small concession by small concession. How someone who loves you can keep handing you a smaller version of yourself until you forget there was ever a larger one. I keep thinking about all the times you said whatever's easiest, sweetheart, she told me once, voice thick, and I let that be easy for me. That's what I'm most sorry for. We were both keeping a peace that wasn't really peace, I said. We're done with that now. We're done with that now, she agreed. Slowly, carefully, we began to build something that could actually hold weight. We had our real Thanksgiving in November, 3 weeks late, but we had it. Fiona and Lucas flew out to St. John's. I paid for Lucas's ticket and told him it was an early Christmas present. We crowded into Blake's house and cooked all afternoon. No perfect table, no managed guest list, no one deciding how anything should look. There was a burned first batch of biscuits, Lucas dropping an entire bowl of cranberry sauce with a shriek that bounced off every wall, and all of us laughing until the windows fogged. At dinner, Blake pulled out a chair at the head of the table. That one's yours, Dad. Sat down in it. And here's what I noticed, the thing I need you to hear. I didn't sit down because I'd been given permission. I didn't sit because I'd earned my way back or waited to be told there was space. I sat because these people wanted me there. Not tolerated. Wanted. There is a country's width of difference between those two words, and I'd spent 4 years mistaking one for the other. My daughter caught my eye across the table. She didn't say anything grand. She just reached over and held my hand a moment longer than she needed to, then let go. Lucas, mouthful of potato, announced to the table that his grandpa had quietly helped 31 people become electricians and plumbers and carpenters, and that absolutely no one had known, and that he personally considered this the greatest thing any grandpa had ever done. It's not a big deal, I started. Grandpa, he looked at me with absolute seriousness. It is a huge deal. Blake raised his glass. This time I raised mine first. Spring came the way it always does in Perry Sound, slowly. Then all at once, the ice going out of the bay overnight and the birches greening up before you notice they've started. I kept my promise. Lucas flew out to stay with me for 2 weeks in July. We cleared the workbench, unrolled the canoe plans, soft now at the creases from months of folding and unfolding, and we built it. Cedar strip 14 feet, exactly as promised. He sanded until his arms ached and didn't complain once. He learned to cut a clean line. He learned that you measure twice, because cedar doesn't forgive a bad cut. We talked while we worked, the way you can only really talk when your hands are busy. He told me about school, about his best friend moving away, about missing his dad some days even after everything. It's all right to miss someone and still be glad things changed, I told him. People are complicated, even the ones who let you down. He turned this over quietly, the way kids do when they're actually processing something and not just waiting for the adult to finish. Grandpa, he said eventually, I never once thought about throwing out that piece of cedar. I know you didn't. Not even once. I know, I said. That's why this summer we're going to make a whole lot more of it. My daughter came for the last few days. She stood in the workshop doorway a lot, a mug of tea going cold in her hands, just watching, a different kind of distance now, the kind that gives room instead of taking it away. On the last morning, we carried the canoe down to the bay. Lucas climbed in. It floated. Of course it floated. I don't build things that sink. He looked up at me, the morning light flat and silver on the water. Prouder than any award has ever made me feel. We did it, Grandpa. We did, Bud. Fiona watched from shore. When I glanced back at her, she mouthed 2 words, thank you. I think she meant for not giving up on them entirely. A father's door doesn't close that easily. I'm not sure it closes at all. Here's what changed in me. For years I confused keeping the peace with keeping the love. I thought if I never made waves, never pushed, never took up more space than was offered, they'd have no reason to leave. I had it exactly backwards. All that silence just made me easy to step around. I don't do that anymore. I say what I mean plainly, and with some kindness. I have lines I won't cross, and lines I won't let others cross. At 57, for the first time in my adult life, I know where I end and other people begin. And those lines aren't walls. They're just the shape that lets the right people stay. Nora's reading chair, the one I'd been meaning to fix since spring. I finally got to it when I came home. She'd have been pleased with how it turned out. Let me leave you with the thing I most want you to carry away from this. Not because I figured it out any faster than you might. I learned it the long, expensive way. You don't have to keep knocking at a door where the decision to leave you outside was already made. I spent years doing exactly that, making myself smaller, easier, quieter, and calling it love, calling it being a good father. It wasn't any of those things. It was fear in a respectable coat. The moment I stopped asking permission, everything shifted. Not because I planned anything, not because I made anyone pay. I just stood up straight in a Legion hall, full of people who valued me, and let myself be seen for once. And the truth did the rest of the work all on its own. If someone treats your presence as optional, believe them. Then go find the table where your absence would actually be felt. That table exists. I promise you it does. Mine was on the other side of the country, and I very nearly never got to it. Standing up for yourself doesn't always look like standing up. Sometimes it just looks like a flight booked and a phone switched off for a few hours over the water. And here's what surprised me most. When I stopped chasing the people who found me easy to leave, the ones who actually loved me moved closer on their own. My daughter came back. Lucas never left. Blake was there the whole time, waiting for me to notice. You are allowed to be wanted, not just tolerated. It took me 57 years to understand that those are entirely different things, and that only one of them was ever worth staying for. Before I let you go, if something in this story stayed with you tonight, leave one word in the comments. Wanted. That's how I'll know you sat with me all the way to the end, and I'll look for it down there. Give this video a like, and subscribe, because next week I have a story about a father who was told his opinion didn't matter anymore, and then his son-in-law needed the one thing only he could give. You will not believe what he decided to do. Thank you for sitting at my table tonight. There's always a seat here for you.